Smell the flowers, blow out the candles. Smell the flowers, blow out the candles. The Errant Sovereign's Handbook. We're going to get this first chapter. Let's see how long it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages. Not bad. We can get it done in a half hour. Are you ready? Pull up a chair, put your headphones in, get to the things that you normally do. There's not going to be that much to look at here. I just have 2 different cameras set up for different camera angles and make it a little bit entertaining or a little bit drawing in so it's easy to stay with me. We're just going to read chapter 1 of the Errant Sovereign. We're going to read it quickly. We're going to read it beautifully. Hear ye, hear ye. This court is now in session. The Honorable Augustus Blackstone presiding. Know all ye that, as pertains to evidence and testimony, the word inadmissible does not exist within this forum. It either happened or it didn't happen. It either exists or it does not exist. It is either genuine or it is not genuine. No fictions of law or fact are recognized. All rise and cheer and clap for the unfettered truth. A most appropriate beginning for the first chapter of this handbook. It is a constant source of wonder to me that judges in today's courts will bind a witness by a solemn oath to testify the whole truth, as perceived by the witness, and then proceed to place restrictions on how much the jury can listen to. It would be refreshing to see a witness toss the insult back at the judge by asking, if you know so much about the truth of this matter, why aren't you on the witness stand? Better still, if a juror were to ask, if you think we're that incompetent, why even bother with the jury? My question in that situation would be, is this a jury trial or a trial by jury? Education in this country has been systematically supplanted with political indoctrination to such an extent and in such a way as to obtain a largely unquestioned conformity from our social behavior and attitudes. It is likely that you, the reader, are a product of this program. This is not intended or to be taken as a disparaging remark. However, it does make it necessary to reaffirm or reorient your understanding of reality with a few basic facts that you are going to need to be aware of. Then we'll get into the meat of what this handbook is about. A witness is actually testifying the truth of his perceptions, which may or may not accurately describe what actually happened. This is actually an asterisk. It is not at all unusual to have a number of versions of truth, which there are numerous witnesses to a single incident. It is the jury's function to determine which version of truth, if any, best matches or will support the available physical evidence and, by extension, define the intent of the accused whenever that is a necessary element of the case. Interfering with that function is, by definition, jury tampering. Some of you may question the need to rehash these basics which children learn in the 3rd grade. If it could be avoided, I would gladly dispense with the exercise. However, a casual and random but extensive survey of young adults and teenagers has revealed to me an alarming lack of working knowledge of these basics. Although there was some recall of having to memorize certain notable people, events, and dates pertaining to the American War for Independence, the recall was vague, uncertain, and fragmented. Far too many people of those surveyed failed to recall receiving any meaningful instruction about the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and related fundamental documents, or the causes which impelled their necessity. Ooh, impelled, I gotta look that up. For example, only a handful of those surveyed were familiar with, and not one could define the word consanguinity. Ooh, I love how I know that because I've read this book a bunch of times, which appears in the Declaration of Independence and which was a highly significant factor in the events of those times. Few of those surveyed were aware that the Bill of Rights has its own preamble, which, by its own language, exempts those 10 articles from the amendment provisions of the Constitution. Of those who were able to exhibit some understanding of the Bill of Rights, only a small fraction could tell me what Articles 3, 8, 9, and 10 were about. None of those surveyed were aware that the original draft of that document contained more than 10 articles, let alone what the additional articles were about or why they were not included in the finished document. It is apparent to me that most of those surveyed had not realized the full importance of the fact that those Yankee rebels in the American colonies were in revolt against their own lawful government. Even when full realization of that fact impinged, there was no apparent ability to apply the information to current government activities or the probable consequences of those activities. It has been said many times over by distinguished scholars and statesmen that those who are unaware of the past are condemned to repeat it. What is the value of knowing the common denominator between modern gun control legislation, Ruby Ridge, Waco, Texas, and the region the British military was ordered to march on Concord and Lexington? I'll let you tell me the answer to that one. It became more and more evident to me as time went on that there is a direct correlation between the amount of actual working knowledge of these basic facts and the age of the survey subjects. That told me quite a lot about the debilitating trend of education and the school systems in this country. Those who could recall having instruction of this sort told me that it amounted to a few days of exposure to the information. Whether or not it actually amounted to more than that is of no great importance when measured against the obvious result. Mere exposure to information, regardless of its duration, does not assure assimilation of the data. Likewise, instruction, which fails to fully consult the understanding of the student, is no guarantee of the ability to apply the information in real life. All of the information in the world is of zero value to anyone if it is not useful or if it is not understood well enough to be applied to real life. To say to me that children have learned these basic facts in the third or any other grade presumes a very great deal indeed. In light of what my survey yielded, I make no such presumptions within this handbook. Although the reasons may vary, it comes as no surprise to me to see growing numbers of young parents schooling their children at home. Those who can afford it are filling seats in the private schools, which demonstrate higher academic standards. Neither is it any surprise to me to see a growing number of young adults expressing a desire to return to the older ways, getting back to the basics, and letting the sophisticated forms of government feed on themselves until wholly consumed. The original design must have been pretty good. The country flourished and prospered under it, became the leading world power under it. Under the newer socialized system, the country is failing miserably. It's time to discard what obviously doesn't work well and go back to what does work. It is nearly impossible to argue against that viewpoint when demonstrable results are the measure. However, in terms of practical implementation, the sentiment of getting back to the quote-unquote good old days and ways also presumes a very great deal. When this country enjoyed its greatest prosperity, there were vast frontiers, rich in natural resources to conquer, grow, and expand into. Opportunity abounded. Today, the only remaining frontiers of any real magnitude are the oceans, outer space, and inner space. The oceans don't seem to stimulate a broad enough popular interest. Inner space, as a frontier, doesn't offer enough monetary incentive. Outer space programs have gone stagnant and will probably remain so until someone comes up with a cost-effective method of propulsion that is more efficient than chemical combustion. When he put the asterisk by sophisticated, I guess he just wanted people to know that the meaning of sophisticated mean less than pure, as in corrupted, and that's Noah Webster's Dictionary, 1828. Without a challenging frontier to quote-unquote push against, a nation will begin feeding on itself. Eventually, other nations will join in on the feast. The rapidly increasing influx of people from all over the world to this country for their share of the pie should serve as a clear warning of where this country is in that process of decay. Given all these factors, this country is overripe for explosive change and social reform. Cultural conflict may very well be the detonator that sets it off. This is much more likely than purely religious or political differences. This brings us to one of the favorite justifications used by attorney generals, judges, legislators, and others of that ilk to explain away their many abridgments and circumventions of constitutional restraints on government. These supposed professionals would have us believe that law and its methods of application have to grow and develop along with society and its technological advances, and that the Constitution therefore could not be intended or applied as an 18th century straitjacket on government exercise of power in the 20th century world. I do not have the stock form immediately before me, but the foregoing paraphrase of it is close enough to serve for now. It is disappointing but hardly surprising to see these legal experts resort to such flimsy deception. An enduring straitjacket is exactly what the framers of the Constitution intended. Those men were not fools and, by comparison, apparently far better educated in statecraft. They could and did envision technological advancement and innovation and provided for protection of intellectual property. They even provided more than one method of amending the Constitution. That doesn't sound like a straitjacket to me. The Constitution does not address technological changes and was not intended to. It addresses the temptations and tendencies of any human being and his governmental institutions. It addresses certain character weaknesses and corruptibility, and those attributes never change. Nowhere in the recorded history have they changed. Our country today is adequate proof of that. How did that come to be? Mostly because the framers of the Constitution were not as explicit as they could have been in its writing. At the time, most everyone was fully aware of what was meant and the reasons for it. It was assumed the knowledge would be accurately passed on to posterity. In that assumption, they obviously did err. If those wise and learned men could be capable of mistakes of that magnitude, one must consider the possibility of even greater capability in that regard among today's experts. More than a few doctors and medical personnel would starve to death or have to seek other employment if a certain level of illness and disease were not maintained or permitted to continue in the world. That is a fact of life that does not necessarily reflect upon the personal integrity of any particular doctor. Likewise, legal professionals have a vested interest in keeping the subject of their profession as seemingly complicated and confusing to the average man or woman as possible. Some of the material in this handbook may conflict with what you have been led to believe about the Constitution and fundamental laws of this nation. It would be presumptuous for me to expect you to believe I'm right and the professionals are not. For my part, all I do expect you to do is consider the possibility and ask yourself who stands to gain or lose the most from the acceptance of either point of view. Keep in mind that government and the legal profession are unavoidably parasitical in nature, as are certain other institutions and professions. On a more personal level, you may want to ask yourself how many parasites you wish to support, as well as which are beneficial to you and which are not. Some may enhance your general well-being, while others may do nothing more than drain you. Personal relationships are sometimes evaluated in this context on a subconscious level by some and consciously by others. You may notice a distinct lack of court case citations in this handbook. That is due in part to the fact that this is not written for practicing law students. It is primarily written for the layman, and is intended to consult his inborn powers of observation and reasoning, sometimes referred to as common sense. The scarcity of citations is largely due to the fact that many of the court cases from which the material is taken or derived are unpublished cases. There is nothing to cite. I know of these matters only because I have had the great good fortune of meeting one or more of the successful parties involved who were willing to share their personal case files and memories with me in some detail. Out of respect for their privacy, I will refrain from naming these people. Some have a genuine fear of retribution, harassment, while others simply have no desire for notoriety. In either event, I do not have express permission to use their names in print. Much of their material I will have to paraphrase because I was not permitted to make copies for myself. Any minor flaws in the legal theory or reasoning will be left unaltered. Skillful litigants who seek a written opinion from the High Court will deliberately put minor flaws in their pleadings, which of course obligates the court to correct the flaws when deciding in favor of that litigant. That is how most case law is created. The next chapter begins with the first of those bald statements you were warned about. That is the first chapter. Thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate you. Take our deep breaths before we read any of this stuff, because it is triggering, and it's just heavy. It's heavy fucking stuff, man. And it's also like really well written. It forces you to use your brain. Thank you again. Please like and subscribe. This is Nus Nero. You see me? Bet. Thank you for coming. I said thank you a billion times, but really, like, thank you for rocking with me on this journey. I'm over and out. Peace.
That was legitness. Yeah, it was. Huh?